Welcome to another wonderful Grace Austen audiobook. We are excited to have you with us. Before we begin the story, please like and subscribe to our channel and share it with friends. This allows us to continue adding free clean Regency romance audiobooks for you to enjoy. The following title is copyrighted by Grace Austen, Regency romance author. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and enjoy the story. The Duke's Christmas Masquerade. Chapter 1. Lady Caroline. Lady Caroline. Look at me. I am a butterfly. A tender smile spread across Caroline's face as she watched her precious niece, Harriet, flit through the garden, gracefully moving her arms. Caroline's heart surged as Harriet knelt in front of an evergreen bush and pretended to drink the sweet nectar from the red berries that dotted its branches. Although it was late in the year, the weather was unseasonably warm, and they were all enjoying their time outdoors, welcoming the break from the rain. "You are a beautiful butterfly," Caroline responded, watching the young girl's face light up with delight. "You may only be 4 years old, but you are certainly the most beautiful butterfly to ever grace our garden." "I'm not a butterfly. I am a bird who will catch and eat her," 5-year-old Isaac exclaimed, as he began to flap his arms and chase his sister. Caroline stifled a laugh as she watched the antics of the children. She truly loved being around them and was never so happy as when she could sit and watch them play, talk with them, or hold them in her arms as they grew sleepy. She had cherished their time together since their infancy, and the children knew their aunt deeply cared for them. "Oh, Caroline! Caroline!" The shrill sound of Lady Beatrice's voice pulled Caroline from her reverie. "We must talk. You cannot put me off any longer." Caroline's heart sank as she looked up to see her mother walking toward her, holding a card in her hand. Without seeing it, Caroline knew the card was an invitation to the upcoming Christmas Masquerade ball. "Caroline," Lady Beatrice said, out of breath from her exertion, "we must discuss the ball. I have tried several times, and each time you have given me a reason to postpone our discussion. We cannot postpone it any longer." Caroline sighed as she turned and looked out across her father's vast grounds. She gazed longingly at the rolling hills and the dense forest in the distance, wanting nothing more than to take her darling niece and nephew and head out for an exciting adventure in the woods. She knew the warm weather would not last, and before long, they would all be kept indoors. She had planned to take them for a long walk, getting lost in the trees and telling stories of fantastical creatures. Knowing this was not to be, and that Lady Beatrice's demands must be met, Caroline reluctantly turned her attention to her mother. "What would you like to discuss about the ball, Mamma?" Caroline asked quietly. "There is much to discuss. Do you understand the significance of this ball? Do you realize where it is to be held?" Lady Beatrice asked, motioning to her grandchildren that it was time to return to the house, while handing the invitation to her daughter. "Yes, I do realize," Caroline answered, glancing at the beautiful invitation her mother had just handed to her. "As it says here, it will be held at the Duke's residence." She handed the invitation back and grabbed little Harriet and Isaac by their hands, inwardly bracing herself for what her mother was about to say. "You are correct," Lady Beatrice replied. "It is at his residence. Which means his eldest son will be there. I have told you so often that I believe Lord Peter Belfour is an ideal match for you. He is tall and handsome, and he is the Duke's eldest son. I desire that you heed interest and consider how very significant this ball will be. Every young lady will be trying to get Lord Belfour's attention, but I believe that this honor can and shall be yours. I will spare no expense in getting you the best and most beautiful costume imaginable. This is your time to catch his eye and interest, and I will not let you run from this opportunity." Catherine knew she had no other option but to agree to her mother's plans. For the last several months, Lady Beatrice had talked of little else than Lord Peter Belfour and his seemingly endless list of good qualities. To Catherine, Peter's haughty demeanor and disregard for others cancelled out any good qualities he may indeed have, but Lady Beatrice would not hear an ill word spoken of the man. "He is not haughty," she would declare. "He knows his rank. He knows what is expected of him, and his behavior is nothing short of proper." Caroline would not argue with her mother, but she did take solace in the fact that her father did not seem to share in his wife's high opinion of the Duke's eldest son. As Marquis of Listerdam, Dalton Hall had been around true and noble gentlemen, and he had never been impressed with Peter Belfour. However, as Dalton Hall was also not one to argue with the woman, Lady Beatrice pressed on in her attempts to make a match. When they returned to the house, the children went to find their mother while Catherine and her mother retired to the parlour. As Lady Beatrice talked of colours, fabrics, and Lord Belfort, Catherine let her mind wander to the man who had truly captivated her thoughts. Reginald Thorson, Viscount of Pettridge, was a kind and good man. He was ruggedly handsome, and his piercing blue eyes often made Catherine's pulse race. He was strong and helpful and was well respected. Most appealing to Catherine, though, was the fact that every time she saw him in the village, he was with his two adorable nephews. She often watched the way he interacted with them, and she could see his patience and gentleness, which spoke to her heart. She could easily see how they loved and admired their uncle. She could also see that they respected and obeyed him. Caroline! Lady Beatrice's sharp reprimand brought Caroline out of her daydream. "Yes, Mamma," she said, sheepishly. Lady Beatrice let out a deep sigh. "I asked you which you thought would be better, the dove or the gazelle." "The dove or the gazelle?" Caroline repeated, confused. She had been remembering a time when Reginald had picked his nephew up and twirled him around, and she could not place what her mother was talking with her about. For the ball, Lady Beatrice said, her patience clearly worn thin. "Oh, yes, for the ball," Catherine answered, silently vowing to not let herself get distracted again. "I think both would be beautiful. What do you suppose would be best?" Lady Beatrice thought for a moment. "The dove would allow you to wear a beautiful, flowing white gown. You would stand out in a sea of colour, and there can be no doubt that you would present a very bridal image, which is the way we want Lord Belfort to think." Catherine did not give an answer, knowing that her mother had more to say. Although she herself had been reluctant to talk about the ball, her mother had talked or thought of little else since the day the invitation arrived. Catherine did not have to wait long to hear the rest of her mother's thoughts. On the other hand, Lady Beatrice said, staring out the window, "A gazelle is so graceful and beautiful. I imagine soft browns and cream colours, still flowing and romantic, of course. And, as you know, Lord Belfort is an avid sportsman, and I believe he would be drawn to a gazelle. Oh, this is such an important decision, and I am not sure what would be best." As Lady Beatrice sat down in a chair to ponder, Catherine walked over to the window and looked down at the garden. She did not want her mother to see her annoyance, but Catherine was weary of the ball being given such importance. Oh, to be away from this all, Catherine thought. To walk away from the pressures of the ton. To get away from the gossip, from the expectations, from the endless list of what I should and should not do. Hearing the children playing in the next room, Catherine let herself get lost in her favourite fantasy. She imagined herself as a governess, diligently working with 4 or 5 young children. She would delight in such a position until the time came for her to marry and have children of her own. Caroline felt herself blush at the idea of marrying Reginald and imagined having young children with her fair hair and his blue eyes. She shook her head and reluctantly brought herself back to her real life. Her mother would never allow her to become a governess. Such an idea would be an outrage. And equally unlikely was Caroline marrying Reginald, as he was so far beneath her station. No, Caroline's life was not going to resemble the one she dreamed about. Not one to dwell on her misery, Caroline turned and walked over to her mother. "The dove," she said, hoping she sounded more enthusiastic than she felt. Lady Beatrice's face lit up. "Oh, do you think," she asked. "Do you think that would be best?" "Yes," Caroline replied. "I believe the dove would be best. There is something about white at Christmas time, and you are quite correct in stating that I will stand out in a sea of colour." Lady Beatrice beamed at her daughter's words. "Can you imagine the mask?" she asked, dreamily. "I can picture feathers and beads. You shall be a dove, and you shall be magnificent." Caroline could not help but smile as her mother hurried out of the room. For the rest of the evening, her mother would be lost in thought, devising elaborate ideas. Caroline shook her head as she realized that tomorrow her mother would meet with the dressmaker, who would then come up with the actual design. Her costume would indeed be magnificent, and she only wished that it could be Reginald's attention she was seeking, rather than the insufferable Lord Peter Belfort. "Auntie! Auntie! You cannot guess who we are." Caroline turned to see her niece and nephew standing at the entry to the parlor, covered in fabric, barely able to contain their laughter. She smiled as she looked at them, taking in their hastily designed costumes. "What do we have here?" she asked, smiling. "We wanted to go to the ball." "We wanted to have our own costumes," Harriet said, her voice muffled behind layers of red fabric. "But you do not know who we are," Isaac added, his voice coming from the pile of blue fabric. Caroline nodded knowingly. "I see," she said. "You have decided to have your own ball, and you are trying to trick me." The children laughed delightedly, thrilled their aunt was joining in their game. Caroline walked over and knelt in front of Harriet. "This pile of red," she said, feigning confusion. "It looks like you may be a rose." "No," Harriet said. "Not a rose, an apple." "An apple," Caroline exclaimed. "And you," she said, turning her attention to the blue fabric. "Are you a blueberry?" "No," Isaac said, laughing. "I am the sky." "The sky," Caroline repeated. "How very clever." "But who is who?" Isaac asked. "You cannot tell because of our masks." "You are right," Caroline agreed, continuing with their game. Turning to Isaac she said, "You must be Harriet." Caroline giggled as the children erupted in laughter, tearing away the fabric to reveal that indeed, Harriet was the apple and Isaac was the sky. That night as Caroline lay in bed, she remembered the delightful game she had enjoyed with her niece and nephew. As she thought more about the upcoming masquerade and how much she longed to spend the evening with Reginald, an idea came to mind, and a sly smile spread across her face. "Perhaps I shall be able to dance with the man I love after all," she thought, before drifting off to peaceful sleep. Chapter 2. Caroline stood outside the dressmaker's shop in the village, contentedly watching people go by. This was one of her favorite things to do, and she would often lose track of time while she gazed. She loved the clamping sounds of the horses' hooves and the rolling sounds of the carriages. She delighted at the colors on the ladies' gowns, and she was always entertained by the social norms as they played out in front of her. Glancing through the window of the shop, she could see that her mother was wrapped up in an intense conversation with the dressmaker. As her measurements had already been taken, Caroline's presence would not be missed. She took a deep breath and decided to walk down the street and look into the windows of the shops and offices. As she glanced around at the humble yet tidy row of buildings, Caroline felt a surge of gratitude for her little village. She knew that it was not anything to boast of, just a simple country town like so many other in the region, but it was her home. Although she was tired of the social scene, she would never lose her love for her home village. She inhaled sharply at the sight of a familiar figure walking down the street. She recognized his long legs and strong arms, and his purposeful and determined gait. Although she could not see his actual eyes from that distance, she knew that they were blue and piercing, and she longed to not only to see them up close, but to see him up close as well. "Reginald," she thought, feeling her face flush with delight. She looked around to see if he was with his nephews, and to her satisfaction she saw two young boys struggling to keep up with their uncle. She smiled as she watched him glance over his shoulder at the boys and say something that made them laugh. She felt a surge of pride in the way he interacted with them. Not wanting to appear too forward, Caroline kept her eyes focused on the other side of the street as she walked toward Reginald. Although it was likely that neither of them ever believed that their encounters were truly accidental, they both kept up the charade that was expected of them. As they approached each other, they kept their faces neutral, but both pairs of eyes shone with excitement. "Lady Caroline," Reginald said, kindly. "Mr. Thorson," Caroline responded, demurely. "It is a fine day, is it not?" "Yes, indeed," Caroline answered. "I have been enjoying the weather lately. I will not allow myself to become spoiled by it, as I know the rain is not far off, but it has been quite lovely." Caroline smiled at the two young faces peering around their uncle's legs. She watched as Reginald leaned down and spoke softly to them, then delighted as the older of the two looked up at her and sweetly said, "Good day, Lady Caroline." "How do you do?" she said, formally. The boy smiled a shy smile and returned to his hiding place. "As you know, these are my sister's sons," Reginald explained. "She has an infant as well, so I often take these two out with me so that she can have some peace at home." "I see you with them often," Caroline said. It is obvious they enjoy being with you. As I enjoy being with them, Reginald said. We have had several adventures together. I have a niece and nephew, and I adore being around them. Reginald nodded approvingly, a slight smile playing on his face. What brings you into the village today? Caroline looked back at the dressmaker's shop, relieved to see that her mother was still inside. I am getting my costume organized for the masquerade. Reginald's eyes glanced over to the dressmaker's, then he focused them once again on Caroline's face. So you plan on attending the ball? Yes, Caroline answered. Do you plan on attending as well? I was considering it, he said, his eyes sparkling. Now I have firmly made my decision. I will be there. Caroline blushed, feeling the full weight of what Reginald was saying. May I ask what your costume will be? Reginald asked, a conspiratorial tone in his voice. Yes, you may, Caroline said, softly. I will be dressed as a dove. Ah, a dove. That seems fitting. Thank you, she responded, taking it as a compliment. And what will you be dressed as? I will be a giraffe. A giraffe? Caroline asked, stifling a laugh. Yes, a giraffe, Reginald said. Indeed, you are rather tall, Caroline said. That is a good choice for you. Thank you, my lady. Caroline smiled as Reginald's nephews began tugging on his arms, and she knew he needed to get back to their adventure. Well, he said, regretfully, it looks as if it is time for me to move along. I see that it is, Caroline said. Have a good day. You, as well. I will look forward to seeing you at the ball, if not before. Caroline felt a surge of excitement as she watched him walk away. She thought back to the plan she had devised the night before. It could work, she thought. It could actually work. Now all I need to do is talk to Evelyn. Chapter 3. Do you truly believe this could happen? Evelyn asked, her face aglow with excitement. Caroline nodded to her cousin. I do, she said, happily. I believe it is the perfect solution. It will give you the opportunity to meet more people in society, and it will give me the freedom I long for. Evelyn smiled as she sat down in an upholstered chair and looked out the tall window. Caroline sat across from her. She looked around her father's library, once again feeling grateful that she had grown up in such a wonderful home. Heavy wooden shelves lined the walls, and each shelf contained books that had helped shape her into the passionate and imaginative young woman she was. As a young girl, she would hide in the library for hours, getting lost in as many books as she could get her hands on. Although she worked on her accomplishments and spent a considerable amount of time outdoors, she was always happiest in this part of the house, surrounded by books, comfortable chairs, and the large fireplace. As Caroline watched Evelyn, she once again marveled at how two cousins, who looked so similar and were nearly the same age, could be so completely different from one another. While Caroline had long since grown weary of the ton and all that came with it, society and its happenings seemed to be the only things that occupied Evelyn's thoughts. When Caroline wished to discuss books, Evelyn preferred to dissect the latest fashions. Caroline longed to travel and explore, while Evelyn's fancy seemed to go no further than pondering whom her partner would be for first two dances at the next ball. Evelyn knew the names of every eligible man in the area, and she also knew which of the young women had set their sights on which of the young men. Evelyn sighed dreamily and turned her attention back to her cousin. I think it is a marvelous plan, she said. It will open up so many new opportunities for me. I have so longed to reach the levels of society to which you are accustomed, but as you know, it has not been my lot. This will allow me to have what I have always wanted. Caroline nodded. I thought of that, too. You will spend the evening surrounded by the most well-respected people in society. Evelyn smiled. We will really exchange costumes? I will be the dove, and you will be the tiger. Yes, Caroline said, smiling. That is the plan. But my costume is not nearly as elaborate nor elegant as yours. And what happens if we get caught in our little scheme? As far as the costumes go, it seems to be only fitting that you are the one to wear the more elegant and elaborate costume. You have always been more interested in fashion, and it seems right that you should have this opportunity. If we get caught, my mother will be beyond angry. Which is why we must not get caught, Caroline said, simply. Evelyn nodded. Which is why I'm glad you have suggested we get dressed at my house and go from there. You know your mother will not depart for the ball from my home. You are correct, Caroline said, proud of her own forethought. Caroline's mother had been at odds with Evelyn's mother for years and had outright refused to visit her home, although they lived within a few miles of one another. Caroline knew that she would be able to get ready for the masquerade ball at Evelyn's house, where their trickery would go unnoticed. Do you really think your mother will agree to your plan? What if she suggests that I come here to your home instead? Evelyn asked, skeptically. I have been thinking about that, Caroline answered. I will simply tell her that my costume is much lighter and easier to transport than is yours. My hope is that I will be able to get my mother caught up in discussing the delicate features of my costume, and she will forget about the fact that she will not actually see me in the costume before the masquerade. Of course, she will be attending the ball, and I will see her there, but she will never actually see me in the costume. She will see you, and she will think she is seeing me. You have thought of everything, Evelyn said. Caroline smiled. I must confess that I have given this a great deal of thought. I think it is a delightful scheme. Not only will it allow me to have some freedom for the evening and allow you to dance among those thinking you are me, but it will also be amusing to trick some people. You are wicked, Evelyn said, laughing. All that is left to be done now is to convince my mother of the plan. At that very moment, Lady Beatrice burst into the room, her face flushed with excitement. Caroline, my dear daughter, you will never guess as to what I have arranged. Lady Beatrice stopped in her tracks as she saw Evelyn sitting in the chair across from her daughter. Evelyn, she said, coolly. I had forgotten you were here. Lady Beatrice paused for a moment, seemingly to consider whether what she was about to say was suitable for Evelyn's hearing. After a moment, she began speaking again, but with more reserve than before. Caroline, she said, standing with her back to Evelyn. I have invited Lord Belfour and his family to come and dine with us. Lord Belfour's family? You mean the Duke? Caroline asked, surprised. The Duke and his family will be coming to dinner here. Evelyn let out a small gasp, but she did not dare speak in front of her aunt. Yes, as I said, Lady Beatrice responded. Why do you act so surprised? Surely, you know our home is fit to entertain the Duke. Of course, Mamma, Caroline said, trying to soothe her. I did not mean to imply that I do not believe he should have been invited here. I am simply surprised by the invitation. It will give you and Lord Belfour the opportunity to get to know one another before the Christmas ball. The meal will be held 1 week prior to the masquerade, which seems to be the ideal timing for such an event. Lady Beatrice looked around the library, seemingly quite pleased with her planning. I am sure it will be a wonderful evening, Caroline said, knowing that no other response would be acceptable to her mother. You always have the home so beautifully decorated for Christmas that I am sure the Duke and his family will be quite pleased. Thank you for your sentiment. I must confess that I am relieved to know you have confidence in my plans, Lady Beatrice answered, turning and walking across the plush woven carpet toward the door. Now you must let me get to my planning. I want to make sure that everything is perfect from the moment they arrive until the moment they leave. Before you go, Mamma, I wanted to talk with you about the Christmas ball, Caroline said, standing up and walking to her mother's side. What is it? Lady Beatrice said, distractedly. Your costume has already been designed and is being made as we speak. I cannot imagine what else there is to discuss, especially when I have such an important matter to attend. Caroline lowered her voice. I wanted to talk with you about Evelyn. Evelyn? Lady Beatrice responded, turning to glare at the young woman sitting across the room from her. Yes, Caroline said, quietly, as Evelyn turned her gaze out the window. Evelyn will be attending the ball, and I would like to help her get ready for it. As you know, she does not have the experience that I have, and there are several areas in which I believe I could be of help to her. Lady Beatrice sniffed. It is no great shock that she does not have your experience. I have worked with you since you were a small child, making sure that you are fully educated in all that is proper and right, ready to fulfill your obligation in society. Evelyn's mother was not nearly so kind to her own daughter. Nor did she marry as well. Although embarrassed by her mother's harsh words, Caroline was determined to make the situation as simple as possible and chose to ignore them. Instead, she simply said, "That is why I believe it would be best if I went to stay with Evelyn a few days before the Christmas ball. I will have time to instruct her in what she needs to know, and on the day of the ball, we shall help one another get ready." "But I would not see you before you go," Lady Beatrice objected. "If you feel that she is in such need of your help, perhaps it is best that she come and stay here. The two of you can dress here and go from our home and in our carriage." Caroline offered a silent prayer of thanks that she had prepared for her mother's suggestion. "I considered that," she said. "However, Evelyn's costume is quite cumbersome. Transporting it here would be a great difficulty, and there is a strong likelihood that it would get damaged. However, my costume is so light and delicate that it will not be inconvenient for me to travel." "Your costume really is quite delicate," Lady Beatrice said, nearly preening. "Have you seen the fine lace detail? And the feathers on the mask? I do believe it will be the most beautiful costume at the ball." "Indeed," Caroline said, feeling relieved that her mother had responded exactly the way she thought she would. "You chose such a beautiful design. It is much lighter than Evelyn's, and it will not be an inconvenience to take it with me to my cousin's home." Lady Beatrice sighed. "I suppose you are right," she said reluctantly. "I agree to your plan, and I will simply see you that night at the ball." Caroline smiled. "Thank you, Mamma. I know that your kindness will not go unnoticed by Evelyn and her family. Once the costume is finished, I will try it on and show you. You will be able to see me here at home, a few days before the ball." "Very well, then," Lady Beatrice replied. "I will return to the parlor and begin my preparations for the dinner with the Duke and his family. If the evening goes the way I imagine, the Christmas ball will simply be an opportunity for you and Lord Belfort to let everyone know what is developing between you." Once Lady Beatrice left the room, Caroline crossed the room to her cousin. "Oh, Evelyn," she said, her eyes gleaming. "It worked. It truly worked." Evelyn grasped Caroline's hands in hers. "I am so looking forward to the ball. I will learn everything that you can teach me, I will have an exquisite costume, and I know it will be an evening I shall never forget. I only hope that the next days pass quickly." "I hope the same thing," Caroline said, gazing out into the fields below, letting herself feel the full excitement of what she was about to do. Chapter 4. To Caroline's delight, the time indeed passed very quickly. There were several meetings with the dressmaker. Lady Beatrice was in a constant bustle about the dinner, and Christmas decorations began to adorn every room of their home. Before she knew it, Caroline found herself getting ready for the dinner with the Duke and his family. She had chosen to wear her dark green silk gown, which had delicate lace along the neck and wrists. Although she did not wish to have the Duke's son as a suitor, she needed to make a good impression on him. She knew her dress was very flattering, yet it was not too ornate. Caroline stood with her family in the drawing room, listening to the approaching sound of the Duke's carriage. Lady Beatrice's exhilaration was palpable, and Caroline was worried that her mother would embarrass her at some point during the evening. "Stand up straighter, Caroline," Lady Beatrice scolded. "This is a very important night for you, for all of us. I will not have you ruin it with terrible posture." Caroline did not argue, but simply shifted her weight a bit to appease her mother. "You will cooperate, Caroline. You will be kind and speak with animation. Lord Peter Belfort needs to marry, and you are the perfect match for him. Do not waste this opportunity." Caroline nodded and was grateful when the footman announced that the Duke and his family had arrived. As much as she was not looking forward to the evening, anything was better than having to endure further lectures from her mother. As everyone greeted one another, Caroline was a bit taken aback by the unreserved nature of Lord Belfort. He eyed her dress approvingly, and at one point, Caroline felt herself blush at his open admiration of her. She had known for a long time that Peter was arrogant and could be very condescending, so she was surprised when he seemed intent on conversing with her. She quickly surmised that as it was just their two families at the dinner, there was no one that Peter was trying to impress, so he was much less insufferable than usual. The dinner passed without incident, and everyone seemed pleased with the menu. The conversation flowed, and Caroline began to feel more at ease. She still did not like Peter, but she did not feel as much disdain for him as she once had. Perhaps tonight will not be nearly as mortifying as I was expecting, she thought. However, later in the evening, as everyone sat down to cards, Caroline's earlier fears were confirmed. She noticed that her mother and Peter were sitting next to one another, and her mother was talking animatedly. Although she wanted to flee the room, Caroline positioned herself so that she could overhear the conversation. "Oh, I do believe your Christmas ball will be highlight of the year," her mother said, her eyes glowing. Peter smiled faintly. "I am looking forward to the evening. I find masquerades to be most amusing. The music will be of the highest quality, as will the food. The dancing will be quite lively, too, and I know it will add greatly to the Christmas season. Will you give us any hint as to what you will come dressed as?" Lady Beatrice asked, fluttering her lashes. "Oh, no," Peter replied. "That would ruin the illusion of the evening. It is supposed to be a night of mystery, with everyone trying to guess who is hidden behind the masks." "Of course, you are correct," Lady Beatrice said. "Although everyone seems to be trying to get hints before the event. In fact, the other day I was in the dressmaker's shop, finishing the touches on Caroline's costume, and everyone seemed to stop and listen in. In fact, I simply commented that I had often seen a dove with touches of grey, and oh! Wait! What have I done?" Caroline cringed with embarrassment at her mother's obvious reveal of her costume. She gathered her courage to look directly at Peter and felt ashamed as he sat with an amused smile while Lady Beatrice went on and on, trying to pretend that her slip was accidental. Peter glanced over and caught Caroline's gaze, and she quickly looked away. She could see that he believed she had put her mother up to the scheme, and Caroline wished everyone would simply go away. She did not want him to know she was the dove, and more than that, she did not want him believing she was seeking his special attention. Caroline excused herself from her table and walked over to the credenza to get more tea. A maid hurried forward to help her, but Caroline assured her that she needed no help. As she did so, she realized that it did not matter if Peter thought she would be dressed as a dove. It would be Evelyn who would don the costume, and Caroline would be free to spend the evening away from everyone's notice. Caroline sat back down at the card table and spent the rest of her time playing with ease. As the games came to an end, Peter made his way across the room and stood next to Caroline, closer than she felt was appropriate. "Hello," he said, his voice husky. "I have not been able to speak to you since dinner." "That is because we were separated by the card games," Caroline said, taking a step back from him. "That is true," Peter said. "However, I did have an interesting conversation with your mother." Caroline didn't want Peter to know she had overheard their entire conversation. "I am glad to hear that," she said. "My mother enjoys conversation and always seems to have an interesting story to share." "Indeed," he said, once again stepping closer to Caroline, while shifting his gaze to a spot above her head. "However, right now I do not wish to speak about your mother. I wish to talk about you. I truly enjoyed being in your presence this evening. We have known each other for years, of course, but we have never spoken as much as we did tonight." Once again, Peter directed his attention above Caroline's head. She looked upward, and, to her horror, realized that her mother had placed a sprig of mistletoe above the entrance to the room. Mortified, Caroline realized that Peter was trying to maneuver her under the mistletoe. "I cannot let him do this to me." Caroline stepped out of the way. "Excuse me," she said, awkwardly. "I must go and see if my mother needs my help." "I think your mother is fine," Peter said, a sly smile spreading across his face. "I will check." Nevertheless, Caroline continued. She hurried across the room to her mother. "Caroline," Lady Beatrice hissed. "What are you doing? Lord Belfour was clearly singling you out, paying you special attention, and you just rushed away from him." "He was trying to force me under the mistletoe," Caroline whispered. "Of course, he was," Lady Beatrice exclaimed. "Why do you think I placed it there?" Caroline shook her head, filled with anger and embarrassment. "And you do not consider that too forward?" Lady Beatrice glared at her daughter. "I do not understand you, Caroline," she said, reproachfully, her voice a hoarse whisper. "Every young woman in the area would love to be in your position. The Duke's eldest son has singled you out, paid special attention to you all evening, and even tried to get you under the mistletoe. And yet here you are, on the other side of the room being particularly rude, and I dare say foolish. Caroline didn't know what to say. In some regards, she knew her mother was right. She knew that almost any other young woman she could think of would have welcomed Peter's advances. But Caroline was not like any of those women. She did not want to be married to Lord Peter Belfour. She did not find him amusing or intriguing, and although he was handsome, his character had such serious flaws that she could never be happy being his wife. Rather than argue with her mother, Caroline decided that she would do what was expected of her. She would eventually be free of the burden, but for the time being, she would not cause problems. "I am sorry, Mamma," she said. "I will go back over to him now." "Good," Lady Beatrice said. "Let us hope he has not been too greatly offended." Caroline nodded, turned around, and slowly made her way across the room toward Peter, her skirts rustling as she walked. She glanced up at him as she got closer and was taken aback by the smug look on his face. "You have returned to me," he said, amused. "Yes," she said. "I did not want you to think me rude." "I did not think you were rude." "I think you are very reserved, perhaps, but not rude." "I am glad to hear you are not offended," Caroline said, forcing herself to sound more amiable than she felt. "I am not offended. I must admit, though, that I am intrigued." Caroline did not respond, and Peter smiled, looking around the room. "Well, my lady, it seems as if the evening is coming to a close. My family is ready to depart, and I do not wish to outstay my welcome. I will see you next week at the ball. I have never before been so eager to see a dove." Peter turned from her and took his leave along with his family. Caroline went through the elaborate motions of saying goodbye to his family, but her mind was occupied. "He thinks that I am excited to see him at the ball. He thinks that I wanted my mother to make this match. I can only hope that my scheme with Evelyn works. I do not want to spend another minute with that man." As Caroline harbored such thoughts, she carefully guarded her expression so that no one would know her true feelings. Chapter 5. "And remember," Caroline said, absently playing with a piece of ribbon, "no matter how much you are enjoying dancing with someone, you cannot dance more than 2 dances with him. If you were an established courting couple, of course, the rule is different. But otherwise, you will be judged harshly." "I understand," Evelyn said, her eyes wide. The 2 cousins had spent the past 2 days enjoying one another's company. They had talked, laughed, taken carriage rides through the countryside, bundled up well against the cold, and spent many hours sitting in front of the fireplace and enjoying the music of Evelyn's younger sister, who played the piano quite well. They were now enjoying a quiet morning together, before the flurry of activity that would come that afternoon as they readied for the Christmas masquerade. "Good," Caroline answered. "You must always be aware of such things and do whatever you can to protect your reputation. If that is spoiled, you will not be able to come back from it." "Sadly, I have seen that with a distant acquaintance," Evelyn said, her eyes downcast. She was seen flirting with a man in public. The man was not her fiancé, and he did not offer to marry her. She was seen as brazen and improper, and now no man of good standing will have anything to do with her. She has lost all hope of marrying well and is doomed to a life of unhappiness, all because she gave in to a fleeting temptation." Caroline shook her head. "It happens far too often. Unfortunately, if she was acting with such little circumspect, then she most likely loved the man, or at least felt a strong inclination toward him. If he did not offer to marry her, he did not love her. And now, unless she finds someone with no social standing at all, she cannot even marry for love." "Marry for love?" Evelyn said. "Do you honestly believe that is an option?" Caroline sighed. "I would like to believe it is an option. I do not believe we are all destined to spend our lives married to a man whom we do not love." Evelyn shook her head. "What if the man you love does not have a fortune? What if he does not have your social status? What if marrying for love means you would have to forfeit a life of having everything that would make you comfortable and secure?" Caroline thought for a moment. "What is the point of having everything that makes you comfortable and secure if you do not have someone you love with whom you can share it?" Evelyn stood and walked absently to the window, looking out over the garden. Recent rains had left puddles everywhere, and the once neatly arranged paths had become nothing but muddy patches. She turned and looked at her cousin and said softly, "I think that if you have the things you want and need in life, then you can eventually grow to love the person who has provided that for you. I also believe that no matter how much you love someone, a life of poverty will ruin that love." Caroline stopped and thought for a moment, considering her cousin's words. "I understand now why you are so eager to get into the highest levels of society." "Yes," Evelyn said. "That should be obvious. I want to make the best possible match." "What if you are matched with a man who is cruel? Or unintelligent? What if he is boring or boorish?" Caroline asked. She had never before stopped to consider Evelyn's point of view. She simply viewed her, and anyone else who was caught up in society, as silly and chasing a fortune. She had not allowed herself to believe that these women also wanted love, and they believed love could and would form over time. She was intrigued and wanted to learn more. Evelyn went on. "I will not marry a man who is any of those things. There are plenty of men in society with good fortunes and social standing. They may not be charming, and I may not love them immediately, but that does not mean they are boorish or cruel. I will not marry someone I do not respect. I will, however, most likely marry someone I do not love, for I believe love will develop over time. But no matter how much money he has, or how high his rank may be, I cannot marry someone I do not respect." Caroline nodded, grateful for her newfound understanding of her cousin. "Let us consider the opposite extreme," Caroline said, thoughtfully. "Marrying for love does not necessarily mean that you will marry into a life of poverty." "That is true," Evelyn conceded. "I have an example to consider," Caroline said, Reginald's face flashing before her eyes. "If there is a man who is only slightly below your rank in society, not so far beneath you as to cause you to lose everything, but perhaps you will have to give up a few of the luxuries you have known. You will disappoint some people, and you will be gossiped about, but you will not become destitute. Does it not make sense, in that situation, to marry for love?" Evelyn considered Caroline's words for a moment. "I suppose you are right," she said. "Although, it would have to be a strong and vibrant love." "Yes," Caroline agreed. "And that is what I want. I want a strong and vibrant love." Evelyn eyed her cousin suspiciously. "Is there someone in particular you are thinking of?" Caroline smiled, but did not answer. "This plan with the ball tonight. Have you done this because you want to spend time with someone who is beneath your rank? Is this what has motivated you all along?" Evelyn asked. Caroline still did not answer, but she could not stop the blush that spread across her face. "And does he know?" Evelyn asked. "Is this man aware of your plan?" "No," Caroline said, shaking her head. "He believes that I will be dressed as a dove. He will think that you are me." "I don't understand," Evelyn said. "Why would you do this?" "Because I want to observe. I want to be unnoticed. I want to see how he acts, how Lord Belfort acts, how everyone acts without knowing I am watching. And I know what costume he is wearing, not Lord Belfort, but the man I am intrigued with. I'm quite certain Lord Belfort will be obvious, too. I simply can't imagine him fading into the background." "And what do you hope to gain from this deception?" "The same thing as you hope to gain, dear cousin. The life I have always wanted." Evelyn smiled and nodded, and the two young women went upstairs to begin getting ready for the evening. Chapter 6. "The orange in this mask is so vibrant," Caroline exclaimed, looking at herself in the mirror. She was pleased to see that she had fully transformed into a tiger, and she was even more pleased to know that no one would be able to figure out who she really was. "I am almost ready," Evelyn said with enthusiasm. "This gown is so beautiful. I must admit that it is a bit too tight in the bodice. I guess we are not exactly the same size after all. At least, I can fasten it. I feel almost like a bride." Caroline sighed. "Yes, a bride. I believe that was my mother's intention all along. She wants the Duke's son to see the dove and instantly believe he has found his bride." Evelyn laughed as she fit the white mask over her face. "You are breathtaking," Caroline exclaimed. "You look absolutely lovely." "As do you," Evelyn answered. They stood in front of the standing mirror, and Caroline remembered the evening that had inspired her idea for the costume switch. She remembered how amused she had been watching her niece and nephew, both so convinced they had tricked her. "Oh dear," Caroline exclaimed suddenly. "What is it?" Evelyn asked. "I did not think about our voices." "Our voices," Evelyn responded, clearly understanding exactly what Caroline meant. "We look similar and are basically the same size, but our voices are so different." "Yes," Caroline agreed. "Yours is high and feminine, while mine is much lower." "What shall we do then?" Evelyn asked. "Perhaps I can sound more like you," Caroline said, forcing herself to speak in an unnaturally high pitch. Evelyn laughed. "You sound nothing like me." Caroline laughed. "You should try to sound like me." "I would have to talk much lower, as if I am trying to sound more like a man," Evelyn said, her voice low and gravelly. Caroline shook her head, once again laughing. "Oh goodness," she said. "This will never do." "Perhaps we would be better served to not say much at all, if anything," Evelyn suggested. "You are right," Caroline said. "And if we have to speak, and someone remarks about the difference, we can simply give the excuse that we have a tickle in our throat." "That is perfect," Evelyn said. Once again Caroline and Evelyn looked at themselves in the mirror. "Are you ready?" Caroline asked. "Yes." "Are you?" "Yes." And with that they turned, left the room, and went out for an evening that they both knew would be unforgettable. Chapter 7. "Here comes our first test," Caroline murmured in Evelyn's ear. They had arrived at the ball, and once they entered the grand room, Caroline saw her mother walking straight toward them. "If we can fool her," Caroline said, "we can fool everyone." Evelyn nodded. Caroline was about to say more, but at that moment Lady Beatrice stood directly in front of them. "Caroline," she said sharply, glaring at Evelyn. "I have been waiting for you too." Caroline smiled behind her mask as her mother barely glanced at her. Lady Beatrice continued, "The costume is as lovely as I imagined it would be in this room. You sparkle, and the white stands out against the sea of garish colors." Caroline cringed as her mother glanced her way as she spoke the final comment. Evelyn simply nodded, and Lady Beatrice continued speaking. "Lord Peter Belfour is here, and I expect you to act properly this evening. We do not want a repeat of last week's near disaster, do you understand? He is the Duke's eldest son." Evelyn nodded again and quietly said, "Yes." "Good," Lady Beatrice continued, not realizing that the voice she heard did not belong to her daughter. Evelyn glanced at Caroline and she nodded at her, silently agreeing that they had succeeded in fooling Lady Beatrice. Lady Beatrice rushed off, and Evelyn and Caroline turned and faced each other. "As I said, if we could fool my mother, we can fool anyone," Caroline said, with no small amount of excitement. "We just have to curtail our speaking." "I agree," Evelyn answered. "I was so nervous, but now I feel much better. I think I will actually enjoy this evening, even more than I thought I would." "So will I," Caroline said. She looked up and saw a man who was clearly Peter making his way across the room, dressed as a horse, his eyes fixed on Evelyn. As she had predicted, no disguise could really hide his identity, something she suspected had been intentional on his part. "It is time," Caroline said. "Have a wonderful evening." "You too," Evelyn said, before turning her attention toward Peter. "Hello," Peter said, as Caroline slipped away from them. She did not want to stay and hear what else he had to say. She made her way to the edge of the room, grateful for her anonymity. She watched as Evelyn stood and listened to Peter. Even from a distance, Caroline could tell that Evelyn was doing little more than nodding, but Caroline knew that Peter would not mind doing the majority of the speaking. Caroline scanned the crowd, eagerly searching out Reginald, remembering that he would be dressed as a giraffe. She eventually spotted him across the ornate ballroom, and she carefully made her way through the milling crowd. Once she was in his vicinity, she positioned herself in a way where he would have to speak to her. "Excuse me," he said, trying to make his way to get some punch. "Oh, hello," she said, softly. "Good evening," he replied, glancing over the crowd. Caroline was pleased to see that he seemed to be looking for her. She tried subtly flirting with him, taking care to make sure that she would not do anything that would appear scandalous. To her great interest, he did not seem to respond at all to her advances. She watched him scan the crowd and then was alarmed to see his shoulders suddenly fall. She followed his gaze and realized that he was watching Evelyn as the dove, truly enjoying the attentions of the Duke's eldest son. "Are you feeling quite well?" she asked. "I beg your pardon." Reginald responded. "I asked if you were feeling quite well." "You seem as if you perhaps are feeling a touch ill," Caroline answered, still disguising her voice. Reginald shook his head. "I am fine," he said. "Thank you for your kindness." As Reginald turned to leave, Caroline knew she had to let him know who she was. She did not want him to feel disappointed any longer. "One of my favorite parts of a masquerade is trying to guess who is behind each mask," Caroline said, drawing him back into conversation. "Yes," he said. "That is part of the fun of a ball such as this." "I see you have been paying attention to the dove and the horse," Caroline said. "You are very observant," Reginald answered. "They did catch my attention." "Do you know who they are?" Caroline asked. "I know who the dove is," Reginald said. "And if the gossip among the ton is correct, I can surmise as to who has dressed as the horse." "Are you certain you know the dove?" Caroline asked, her voice playful now though still disguised as best she could. "I am fairly certain," Reginald said, confused. "I have heard a rumor that may make you change your mind," Caroline replied. Reginald looked at her inquisitively. "What have you heard?" "I have heard that a young lady had intended to dress as a dove, but instead changed her mind. She switched costumes with her cousin." Reginald's eyes lit up at the information. "Then that is not her," he exclaimed. Caroline's heart began to pound when she saw how relieved Reginald seemed to be to realize that she was not the one enjoying the attention of Peter. Reginald turned and looked at her again. "Pray tell, what was the cousin's costume?" Caroline smiled. "Her cousin was to dress as a tiger." A broad smile stretched Reginald's handsome face below his mask. "Lady Caroline?" he asked, quietly. Caroline nodded. "Yes," she said. "It is I." "What a wonderful surprise," Reginald said warmly. "Then I must ask if the tiger would be willing to join me for the first dance." "The tiger would be honored," Caroline responded, her heart full. She rested her hand on his and they proceeded to the dance floor. Once the music began, Caroline marveled at how skilled and graceful Reginald was. He was quite light on his feet, and it felt to her as if they were made to dance together. As the evening progressed, Caroline occasionally glanced at Evelyn, and she could see that Evelyn was enjoying the attention of almost everyone in the room. The dove costume was truly stunning, and while Peter was the most obvious captor, several other young men in the room were drawn to the dove. Caroline gazed over to her mother, who was proudly watching Peter's interaction with Evelyn. Caroline knew that her mother was convinced that her plans had come to fruition, and she felt a twinge of guilt when she realized that Lady Beatrice would be sorely disappointed. Caroline remembered Peter's behavior at the dinner in her home, and quickly dismissed any feelings of remorse. She blissfully turned her attention back to Reginald. After their second dance together, Reginald leaned in toward Caroline. "I do not want to dance with anyone else," he murmured. "But we cannot dance again," Caroline said. "We have already danced together twice. If we dance more, people will talk." "What will they say?" Reginald asked teasingly. "No one knows who we are. The gossip will be that a tiger and a giraffe spent the evening dancing together. I trust no one has guessed our true identities, and we do not have to tell them." "You are right," Caroline said. "We can do what we wish, with no consequence to our reputations." "Then will you dance with me?" Reginald asked. "I would be delighted to," Caroline answered. When the dance ended, Reginald led Caroline over to a side door. "I want to talk with you, Lady Caroline. I want to speak directly, without risk of being overheard. Will you join me for a brief walk outside?" "Unchaperoned?" Caroline asked, shocked. "But that isn't appropriate." "You are right in that. However, remember, no one knows who we are," Reginald answered. "Still, if you are in any way uncomfortable, we shall not do it." Caroline did not want to let this opportunity pass. Her pulse raced as she took a deep breath. "I will join you," she said. Reginald held the door open for Caroline, and they both quickly stepped outside. Although the air was cold and damp, she relished the quiet after the stuffiness and noise of the ballroom. "This is much more pleasant than the crowded ballroom," Caroline said. "Yes, I agree." Caroline looked up into the sky, marveling at the stars. "I love clear nights such as this," she said. "It is cold, especially at this time of year, but the stars are so crisp and beautiful. I have always enjoyed stargazing." Reginald directed his attention upward. After a few moments of silence, Reginald cleared his throat. "I must behave honorably, Lady Caroline," he said, a touch of regret in his voice. Caroline turned and looked at him. "What is it?" "I have truly enjoyed spending time with you this evening, and I am so pleased that no one knows who we are. But we cannot ignore the fact that tomorrow we will not be in costume, and we will not be able to act in such a way." Caroline sighed. "That thought has been at the back of my mind all evening. But I must confess to you, my lady, I always enjoy the time I spend with you, whether in the ballroom or in the village, whether in costume or not." Caroline smiled. "And I enjoy the moments I spend with you." "When I believed it was you with Lord Belfort, I was overcome with jealousy," Reginald admitted. "I am sorry I did not let you know who I was sooner," Caroline said. "I am quite fond of you, Lady Caroline." "And I am quite fond of you, Mr. Thorson," Caroline responded, her voice equally tender. Reginald stared at her for a moment before finally speaking. "Perhaps it is more than fondness." Caroline's breath caught. "Perhaps it is." Reginald took her hand in his and squeezed it gently. "I fear we must go back inside. It is quite cold, and I believe they are about to start the final dance selection." In companionable silence they went back into the ballroom and blissfully danced the final 2 dances together. Chapter 8. "You danced together so many times?" Evelyn asked, shocked. "We did," Caroline said, her voice hushed but excited. The 2 cousins were back at Evelyn's house, and while it was long past the time to go to turn in, they were both too wound up to sleep. They could not stop talking about all that had happened at the ball. "I cannot imagine dancing with someone so many times. What if someone knew who you were? If anyone knew who we were, we would never be able to show our faces in society again, but that is the wonderful thing about a masquerade. No one guessed it was us." Suddenly Evelyn's face went pale. "I fear we're being a bit naive, cousin. What if your mother was watching you and believed that you were me? What if she thought I was the tiger and danced with the same man so repeatedly?" Caroline shook her head. "She did not notice. She was too busy watching you and Lord Belfort all evening." Evelyn sat back, a slow smile spreading over her face. "He did spend most of his evening by my side," she said, contentedly. "I noticed that." "Did you talk with him very much?" "We did talk a lot, actually," Evelyn said. "At first, I was worried about my voice, and he even mentioned that I sounded different. I explained to him that I had to talk louder than normal so as to be heard above the noise of the orchestra, and he believed me." Caroline laughed. "That was quite clever." "I thought so," Evelyn answered. She sat back with a dreamy expression on her face. "I spent the entire evening with the Duke's eldest son. Imagine that. Me, who has no real social standing. We talked and danced, and we both had a wonderful time." "I am happy that you enjoyed yourself," Caroline said. "And what do you think of Lord Belfort, after having had the opportunity to get to know him better?" "I think he is a very rich, distinguished man. He does think highly of himself, and he is not the kindest man I have ever met. But he is not cruel, and he is so handsome and well-to-do. I could be happy with him," Evelyn answered, practically. "Then I am happy you had such a wonderful night," Caroline said, yawning. "It is late, cousin. We must try and get some sleep." "What will happen now?" Evelyn asked. "I am not sure," Caroline answered. "I am trying to figure that out." Chapter 9. "Ah, Caroline, you are home," Lady Beatrice exclaimed. Caroline took a deep breath, turning to face her mother. She had wanted to slip into the house unnoticed, but her plan failed. "Good morning," she said. Lady Beatrice beamed. "I have to say, Caroline, you behaved wonderfully last night. I was a bit doubtful, but you clearly captured Lord Belfort's attention. I could not take my eyes off you too. You will make such a beautiful couple. Imagine my daughter married to the Duke's eldest son." Caroline sighed. "I am not engaged to him, Mamma." "You are not engaged yet, but I know it will happen soon." 2 hours later, Caroline was sitting in the library, trying to read, but frequently getting distracted by thoughts of the previous evening and her time with Reginald. She was startled by an announcement that Lord Peter Belfort had come to call on her. She stood and tried to ready herself, but before she could settle her nerves, Peter came into the room. Her personal maid backed away, taking an unobtrusive spot near the back corner of the room, where she could chaperone from the shadows. "Good morning," Peter greeted her, his voice friendly and confident. "Good morning," Caroline answered, her own voice distant and reserved. "Did you sleep well?" Peter asked. "Yes, I did." "Thank you." "Good." Caroline sat in silence, wishing he would turn right around and leave as quickly as he had come. He was not the person she wanted to see, not the person her heart yearned for. After a few more minutes of awkward silence, Peter finally spoke again. "I thought of the answer to your question." Caroline looked at him, suddenly panicked, not knowing what to say. She did not know what he was talking about, and she assumed it was something from his conversation with Evelyn the night before. "Do you want to know what it is?" he asked, sounding slightly annoyed. "Oh, yes. Most certainly. Are you feeling well this morning?" Peter asked. "You seem quite different than you were last night." "I must confess I am tired," Caroline said, coughing lightly to lessen the contrast of her voice to her cousin's. Peter stared at her for a moment and then spoke. "The answer to the question is Rome." "Rome," Caroline repeated. Peter looked at her, puzzled. "That is all you have to say in response." Caroline looked at him again, not knowing what other response would be appropriate. "Why does it seem as if you are unaware of the conversation we had last night? Do you not remember?" "We talked so much," Caroline said, trying to find a way out of her predicament. Peter's face flushed with anger. "Yes," he said, his tone clipped. "We talked of many things, but you asked me that one final question, and I told you that I would tell you the answer another day." "Yes, you are right," Caroline said. Peter tilted his head. "Your voice sounds different today." "I am not speaking loudly," Caroline said, remembering what Evelyn had told her the night before. "What was the question you asked me last night?" Peter asked, his voice flat. "The question I asked you." Caroline feigned confusion. Peter stood up. "Yes. Tell me right now. What was the question you asked me?" Caroline thought for a moment and decided she would try and guess which question would cause him to give the answer of Rome. Finally, she said, "I asked you about the favorite place you have ever visited." "No." Peter shouted. "You asked me where is one place that I have never been but have always wanted to visit." His angry voice brought Caroline's parents to the room. "Is something the matter?" Lady Beatrice asked, nervously glancing between Peter and Caroline. Caroline's father eyed Peter suspiciously. "Why is there shouting? I want to know what is going on. Last night, your daughter asked me a very specific question, and today she cannot remember what the question was. In fact, she remembers asking me something completely different." Lady Beatrice looked in confusion at her daughter. "Caroline, what is happening here?" Caroline looked around the room and realized she had no other choice but to tell the truth. As everyone looked on in shock, she confessed to her trickery of the night before. She told them of the costume switch, of disguising their voices, and of Evelyn spending the evening pretending to be Caroline. When she finished her explanation, Peter threw up his hands in disgust and stormed out of the room. "Why did you do this?" Lady Beatrice asked, her shrill voice piercing the silence of the room. Caroline's father tried to soothe his wife, but to no avail. "Do not try and calm me," she snapped at him. "Our daughter has ruined her chances with the Duke's eldest son, and I want to know why." "I am in love with someone else," Caroline said softly. She noticed that her father looked at her with tender curiosity, but her mother's anger boiled over. "You are in love with someone else," she nearly shrieked. "Who can possibly compare to the Duke's son?" "I'm sorry, Mama, but it is true," Caroline answered. "Who is this man?" "Reginald Thorson, Viscount of Pettridge," Caroline answered, simply. "Viscount of Pettridge?" Lady Beatrice shrieked. "Did you hear that, Dalton? A Viscount? Our daughter would throw away her chances with Lord Peter Belfour for a Viscount? That man is beneath you, Caroline. Beneath your station. I love him, Mama." "Beatrice, please calm down," her father said. "We can discuss this sensibly." "Sensibly?" Lady Beatrice shouted, throwing her arms wide in her frustration. "You foolish girl. After all I've done for you. This isn't over, I can tell you that." And with that, she stormed out of the room. Caroline's father sighed and suddenly looked every year of his age. Later, he told Caroline, "We'll talk about this later." Caroline sat down in the lush stuffed chair her mother had just ordered from London and looked at the fire, trying to figure out what she could do. She was ashamed that she had not fully thought through her plan. She had not thought beyond the night at the ball and had not fully realized the consequence of her actions. Her eyes filled with tears, and as the tears threatened to fall, Reginald walked into the room. Her heart soared when she saw him, but then immediately sank again. "Good morning, Lady Caroline," Reginald said. "Good morning, Mr. Thorson," Caroline answered, her voice trembling. Did you greet my parents on your way in?" "No. Your doorman let me in. I assumed your parents were here with you." "What is wrong?" Reginald asked. There was a swish from the doorway. "Why are you here?" Lady Beatrice's angry voice filled the room as she stood glaring at their guest. And then, she seemed to realize how uncouth she sounded. She swallowed and her face flushed red. Reginald had turned around. Caroline began to make introductions, but Lady Beatrice interrupted her. "I know who he is," she said, her voice full of judgment. "This is the Viscount who has turned your head and is trying to ruin your life." She took a deep, full breath. "It is not proper, nor is not right. I will not recognize him at this moment. However, he should know that the way he is behaving is wholly inappropriate and will be your ruin." Reginald stiffened at the words. Lady Beatrice raised her chin and held her ground. Caroline turned to look at Reginald, afraid of what she would see. To her dismay, he would not meet her eye. "I must be going," he said, taking his immediate leave. Caroline rushed after him, brushing past her mother, hoping she could get Reginald to change his mind. "Mr. Thorson, please stay. We can talk about this. We can talk to my parents." Reginald shook his head and hesitated but a moment. "No. Your mother is right. I must go." He opened the door and left, without looking back. Feeling as if her heart would break, Caroline wrapped her shawl more tightly around her shoulders and ran out after him. "Mr. Thorson," she said, catching up to him at the edge of the drive. "Please, talk to me. Please don't take your leave like this." Reginald turned and looked at Caroline. His eyes were full of tenderness, but his jaw was firmly set. "As I said, your mother is right," Reginald said. "I am not worthy of you or your station. You are above my rank, and it was improper for me to make advances toward you." "Above your rank?" Caroline said, her voice imploring. "Do you think I care about that? It means nothing to me." Reginald's face softened for a moment, and Caroline thought she had gotten through to him, but his jaw stiffened. "I will not do that to you," he said. "I did not consider." "You have not considered things properly, either. Once you take time to think on this, you will see that I am right. Your mother is right." "No," Caroline argued. "I will not. We had a wonderful evening. We enjoy spending time together. Why should we let titles and ranks get in the way of what I believe could be love?" Caroline was shocked at her own brazen words, but she somehow knew that this might be her only chance. She couldn't let him go. She simply couldn't. Her throat tightened, but she didn't let her gaze waver. Reginald sighed. We did have a wonderful time, but you know how society functions. This is not to be. Reginald turned to leave again, and Caroline called out. Please wait, she said. I have an idea. Reginald hesitated and looked at her. What if you had to marry me? She asked. What do you mean? Reginald said, his eyes widening in shock. I mean, what if you had to marry me to save my reputation? If we were caught in a compromising position, you would have to marry me. Society would demand it, no matter what our ranks might be. No, Reginald said, emphatically. No. I will not let that happen. I will not agree to something that would put you in such a bad light. I am too fond of you to allow that to happen. No, Lady Caroline. You must go. I must go. This will not happen. Reginald turned and walked away, his shoulders set. Caroline knew that it was futile to try and stop him further, and her chest constricted with pain as he left her standing there alone. Chapter 10. You want me to do what? Leave you alone with him? Have you lost your mind? Evelyn asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Caroline had come to talk with her cousin, filling her in on the events of the morning. Evelyn was sorry for the part she had played in her cousin's trouble and offered to do whatever she could to help. Caroline told her of her plan. No. I have not lost my mind, Caroline said. Reginald and I have always had chaperones with us, with the exception of the few moments outside on the drive yesterday. In town, his nephews and others were around, and at my house, my maid is always dutifully in the room. That is the only way it is proper for us to be together. Evelyn nodded. To be without a chaperone is to open yourself up to judgment of the worst kind. I am most aware of that, Caroline said. Judgment that will only be diminished if we marry. Evelyn gaped at her. You would go to such lengths for him, cousin? Do you truly understand what you're asking me to do? She sighed heavily. I know you love him. But are you willing to do anything to marry him? I do love him, Caroline said softly, and yes, I'm willing to do almost anything to marry him. Then I will help, Evelyn said. We will go for a walk with him, and I will leave the two of you alone. I will make sure you are discovered, and everything will go the way you want it to go. Thank you, Caroline said. And then when Lord Belfour calms down from his anger, perhaps he will come to call on you. He will remember he had a wonderful time with you, and he will see you for how delightful you truly are. Evelyn smiled. That would be ideal and quite romantic. But you forget, dear cousin. I do not have as many romantic notions as you do. If I am not to marry the Duke's eldest son, which is highly unlikely, I will find someone else. The next day, Evelyn and Caroline walked through the village together. Caroline had barely been able to get away, as her mother was still furious with her. Her father had intervened, however, and Caroline had left promptly before he changed his mind. Now, they saw Reginald on the street ahead of them and hurried to catch up to him. When he saw them, he smiled kindly, but was more reserved than usual. Good afternoon, he greeted them stiffly. Caroline noted that he seemed reluctant to look at her. Good afternoon, Mr. Thorson, Elaine replied. And where are you headed on this clear but cold day? Now, he did cast his eyes upon Caroline. Her breath caught at the veiled longing she saw there. We are simply out for a walk, enjoying the weather. Where are you headed? Elaine asked. I am doing the same, Reginald said. Since we are all about the same thing, may we join you? Elaine asked. Caroline prayed silently that he would agree. He hesitated, and then said, I would be honored. As they walked toward the woods, Caroline signaled to Evelyn that she was to leave them. Evelyn took a deep breath and then abruptly turned and started to walk away. Reginald stopped walking. No, he said sharply. No, Caroline. Tell your cousin to come back at once. Caroline looked at Reginald. It is our only hope. Please let her go. No, he said again, more forcefully. Call her back this instant. Caroline dropped her head in defeat and called out to Evelyn. Evelyn turned and looked at Caroline, a confused expression on her face. She took a few steps their way again, still giving them enough space to talk privately. "Why would you do this?" Reginald asked, his face tight. "I told you I did not want any such thing. I will not risk your reputation. Why would you try and force me into such a situation?" "There was no other way," Caroline said. "There is no other way for us to be together." "There is no honor in this," Reginald said. "Love honors one another. I cannot allow it, and I am dismayed you would try." Reginald turned and walked away, while Caroline sank down onto a fallen log. Evelyn joined her and sat quietly as her cousin gave way to tears. Chapter 11. "Lord Peter Belfour has come to call," one of the maids said, her voice betraying no emotion. Lady Beatrice looked up from the letter she was writing. "Did you say Lord Peter Belfour?" Peter walked into the room before the girl could answer. "Yes," he said. "I have come to call on your daughter." Beatrice laid her pen aside, apparently too shocked to speak. "May I see her?" "She is here," Lady Beatrice replied, regaining her composure. She looked to the maid waiting for her to go fetch Caroline, but then she changed her mind. "I shall call her." The maid quietly took her place in the corner of the room, tending to some needlework. Clearly, she sensed that she would be asked to play chaperone. Lady Beatrice made her way quickly to Caroline's chambers. She entered without knocking. "Lord Peter Belfour has come to call on you," she announced. Upon seeing her daughter's sour expression, she continued almost fiercely, "Mind yourself, daughter. I expect you to be both polite and welcoming. Do not dare ruin this chance, which truly, you do not deserve. I will be right outside the door, listening." Caroline pressed her lips together. What was the use fighting her mother? It seemed that no matter what efforts Caroline put into finding her own path to love, she was thwarted. Now, even Reginald was angry with her. She stood and squared her shoulders. "I shall be nothing but polite, Mamma." She stopped to check herself in her mirror before leaving her room, her mother at her heels. She entered the sitting room almost regally. Peter stood. "Lady Caroline, I must ask you to forgive me for barging out of the house so angrily the other day." Caroline nodded. "It is I who must apologize," she said, knowing her mother was listening just outside the door. "You had cause to be angry." Peter continued, "In truth, I was shocked and embarrassed by your deception, and I reacted poorly." "What I did was wrong," Caroline said. "And it is I who asks for forgiveness." "You are forgiven," Peter said. "We shall never speak of this again," agreed. "Agreed," Caroline said, smiling. This conversation had to be pleasing to her mother. Peter crossed the room and stood close to her. "Now that we have settled the matter, it is time for us to speak of more pleasant things." He reached for her hand. Caroline took a quick step back from him. "What are you referring to?" Peter's eyes flashed with annoyance, but he quickly regained his composure. "Everyone saw how I was behaving with the woman they assumed was you the other night. I have no other choice than to court you." "But why?" Caroline asked. "I shall simply admit that I was not adorned in a dove costume at the ball." Peter frowned. "Everyone now believes that I have chosen you. I attempted to set the matter straight, and it did not work. My father is convinced, and he is quite happy that I have chosen you. If we do not move forward, there will be only two possible explanations, and neither is acceptable to me. The first explanation is that I am a cad for falsely pursuing you, which I am not. The second explanation is that you have rejected me, and that cannot be believed either. Our only option is to move forward." Caroline took another step away from him. "I do not want to move forward," she said firmly. "It was not me with whom you spent the evening. It was my cousin. You may move forward with her." "I cannot move forward with her," Peter said, harshly. "Is it to be publicly known that the Duke and his family were made fools of?" "No, that cannot be. As I said, there is only one solution." "I am sorry," Caroline said. "I do not wish to be courted by you. I do not love you." Lady Beatrice rushed into the room. "My daughter speaks with haste. She would be most honored to be courted by you." Please do not speak for me, Mama, Caroline said, working to keep her voice calm. How was it that things had gotten so completely out of her control? Peter laughed, and there was a bitter edge to it. He looked at Caroline. My lady, you will obey your mother just as you will learn to obey me. In this case, your opinion does not matter. Society and my father have determined that we are a good match. It is expected of us, and your trickery has left us both with no other option. But I do not agree to this, Caroline protested again. Lady Beatrice gave her an acid look. You will agree. Peter walked toward her again, but Caroline escaped the parlor and ran to her room. On the way, she nearly knocked into her father, who was on his way into the sitting room. For the next several minutes, she heard Peter's angry voice and her parents' muffled replies. She stayed in her room for the rest of the evening, firmly defying her mother's repeated calls to come out and talk with them. The following morning, Caroline bundled up and slipped out of the house before anyone else had awakened. She wanted to clear her head, and she knew that a long walk through the countryside and village might give her some peace and perhaps even a solution. What kind of Christmas would this be if she was destined to be courted by Peter? As she wandered her way through the frozen meadow that morning, she thought about her current situation and wondered what she could do. I cannot marry Peter, she thought. I do not love him. I do not respect him. I would be miserable, and thus, so would he. She felt an overwhelming sense of regret as she thought about what she had done. As she walked into the village, she was surprised to see that it was much later than she had thought it was. The shops were already open for the day, and people were milling about on the street. As she made her way through the cheerful crowds who were giving each other early Christmas greetings, she found herself looking for Reginald. To her dismay, she saw Peter instead. Caroline quickly turned around to go the other way, wanting to get away from him and back to her family. She heard footsteps approaching her from behind, but she dared not turn around. She was stopped in her tracks, however, when she heard Peter's voice call out, coldly, Caroline! Caroline Hall! She gasped, as did several others on the street. How dare he use her first name in such a familiar manner? Why would he be so informal? Everyone would surely assume they were engaged now. Right then, she could not continue to ignore him without bringing shame upon not only herself, but also upon her entire family. Caroline slowly turned around, forcing herself to look at him. He was approaching her at a fast clip. The glare in his eyes and the ominous smile on his face made her tremble. He walked over to her and put his arm around her shoulders, a brazen gesture that effectively sealed her fate. Good morning, he said, his voice low and terse. Good morning, she answered, her voice barely above a whisper. She tried to wriggle out from under his grip but was unable to. The eyes of everyone in the village were upon them. Do you understand how everything must be now? He asked, his smile disguising his cruel intent. Why yes, she was forced to say, looking around at the eyes of everyone on the street, all of them still brazenly watching the two of them. I understand. I knew you would, Peter said. I'm not entirely unpleased. I find myself intrigued with your spirit and strong opinions. And you are not unbecoming. In truth, you are quite comely. We shall look good side by side. I will be at your house later today. We will discuss our engagement with your family. And Caroline, you will never reject or embarrass me again. Caroline gave a curt nod as her eyes filled with tears. Feigning a smile, she bid Peter farewell and hurried toward her home. Once she was safely inside her room, she fell down onto her bed and wept with abandon. Chapter 12. I must say that this is the most pleasant and welcome of surprises, Lady Beatrice said, smiling broadly at Peter and Caroline. Caroline found no comfort in her words. The afternoon had been a blur for her, as Peter had come to the house, asked her father for his blessing, and then officially proposed to her. Caroline felt her father watching her, but she could not bring herself to look at him. She was so very unhappy, and she didn't think she could bear the pity in his eyes. Peter cleared his throat. I am also quite pleased at the outcome. I know that your daughter and I shall be a good match, and our marriage is the right and proper thing to do. This is such a wonderful thing to celebrate, and to have it happen so close to Christmas makes it all the more noteworthy, Lady Beatrice gushed. Caroline longed for Reginald. longed for his presence, his warm smile, the glow in his eyes when he looked at her. But he wasn't there, was he? It was unlikely that she would ever have the chance to speak with him alone again. She would never have a chance to express her affection. Standing beside Peter, she felt empty and hopeless. But surely she could come up with some kind of plan to get herself out of this. She'd never given up on things before, had she? Then she remembered Reginald's harsh tones with her and inwardly groaned. The hopelessness in her heart grew. The next few days were a whirl of activity as Lady Beatrice immediately began planning the wedding. Although Caroline wanted to wait until after Christmas to begin preparations, Lady Beatrice insisted that Caroline visit the dressmaker to begin the design for the wedding gown. Caroline knew there was no point in resisting, and early one morning, she and her mother went into the village. Once again, Caroline slipped outside the shop and let her mother discuss the pattern they had chosen. As she walked down the familiar street, she was startled to hear a young voice behind her. "Morning, Lady Caroline," a child's voice said. Caroline turned around and saw one of Reginald's young nephews smiling up at her. "Why, hello there," she said, kindly. Her heart leapt. Was Reginald near? The child wouldn't be alone, would he? She looked around but did not see anyone with the young boy. "Are you out by yourself?" The boy shook his head. "No, I am with my uncle," he explained. "He's in the shop. I came outside while he gets done with his talking." Caroline smiled at the sweet explanation. Just then the shop door opened to the ringing of a bell above the door, and Reginald stepped into the street. "Oh, hello," he said, his tone startled but kindly enough. "Hello," Caroline answered, relieved to once again see something besides anger in his expression. But she found herself feeling awkward, not knowing what to say. She glanced at the ground, hoping that Reginald would not ask her why she was in the village. She did not want to tell him she was promised to Peter or that she was there to begin the design of her wedding gown. Reginald lowered his voice so that only Caroline could hear. "Is it true?" he asked. So, he did know. Caroline could not bring herself to answer aloud, but simply nodded. "I heard that there was a strange interaction between the two of you on the street. Did that happen?" Reginald asked, sharply. Caroline nodded again, her eyes filling with tears. "So, you see it was best that we didn't," he hesitated, and his voice faltered before he continued, "Are you happy?" Caroline shook her head slightly, and then forced herself to look away from him. Reginald stood in silence for a moment, and Caroline realized that there was nothing more that could be said between the two of them. "I must be going," she said quietly. "I understand." "Goodbye, Lady Caroline," he said softly. Was that regret she heard in his voice? She couldn't be sure, and his expression certainly did not register it. "Goodbye, Mr. Thorson," Caroline responded, then quickly hurried back to the shop to find her mother. Chapter 13. "Are you sure you can forgive me?" Caroline asked. "As I said, there is nothing to forgive," Evelyn stated. "Lord Peter Belfour has made his decision. Things have happened, and there is nothing that anyone can do. Besides, even if I had harbored some type of romantic notion toward him, after what he has done to you, I could never view him in the same way as I did before." Evelyn had come to spend the morning with Caroline, and the two cousins were sitting in the drawing room, drinking tea and nibbling on cookies. Caroline sighed. "I am thankful that you will forgive me. I will not pretend to be happy about this, especially with you. You know that I wanted to marry for love, and you know that I do not love the Duke's son." "I know you do not," Evelyn said, her voice thick with compassion. "And I feel sad that you are in this position. I am here because of my own foolish choices, and I have decided that I will not allow myself to drown in self-pity," Caroline said. "I feel I am forced to accept this." "I am sad for you, cousin," Evelyn said. "But it isn't like you to give in so easily, though. You are one of the bravest people I know." Caroline smiled. "But even I know when to give up." At that moment, Caroline's father stepped into the room. "I am sorry to interrupt your visit," he said. "Caroline, I must speak with you in my library at once." Caroline looked at her father, alarmed. She had never heard him speak with such urgency. "Is something amiss, father?" "There is nothing to worry about, Caroline," he said, kindly. "However, I do need to speak with you in private." Caroline excused herself from the room and followed her father into the library. Once there, she watched in silence as her father closed the door behind them and settled down at his desk. Although she wanted to know what was going on, she knew she must wait until he was ready to speak. "Caroline," he finally said, "I have to speak to you about something of a personal nature. I know this conversation may make you uncomfortable, but it is something we must discuss, and I need you to be truthful with me." "I will be truthful, Father," Caroline promised. "Good. I need to speak with you because this morning I had a visit from someone who told me a very upsetting story. His claims were so distasteful that I felt the need to confirm some of the details myself." Caroline nodded, wondering who had visited and what the story could have possibly been. She waited for her father to continue. "I went into the village, and with some very discreet questions, I was able to determine that my visitor this morning was likely telling the truth. I now need you to confirm or deny his story. I will tell you whatever it is you want to know." Her father leaned back in his chair, a troubled expression on his face. "The story that I heard was that on the morning of the day you and Lord Belfour were engaged, he behaved very inappropriately with you in public. I heard that he addressed you by your first name, loudly and crassly, and then went so far as to place his hand on your arm. Is this true?" Caroline lowered her eyes in shame. "Yes, Father, it is true." "I see," he said, his face flushing in consternation. "And at the time of his actions, was there a private understanding between the two of you? Did he have reason to believe that his advances would be welcome, no matter how inappropriate and in public they may have been?" "No, Father. There was no understanding." Caroline's father rose to his feet, his face set in a stern frown. "I now see what has happened. I must admit, I was surprised at your sudden change in feeling. The last I was aware, you had rejected him. Twice. And then he came to me and told me that you two had come to an agreement and were intent on marrying one another. But there was no agreement at all. He trapped you. He behaved in such a way as to give you no other choice but to agree to marry him. He was willing to stain your reputation in order to have his way." Caroline nodded, overwhelmed with relief that her father knew the full story. "Excuse me, Caroline," he said sternly. "I must be on my way." "Where are you going?" "I am going to visit the Duke," he said. "He deserves to know the behavior of his eldest son. I will reveal to him your deception, but I will also make sure he knows exactly what his son has done to punish you for your scheme. I will not agree to have you marry someone so unfeeling or conniving." Caroline's heart filled with hope as she watched her father call for his coat and the coach and leave the house. Chapter 14. "Would you like some more tea, Mama?" Caroline asked. Lady Beatrice shook her head. "No, I have had enough." It had been 2 days since Peter and Caroline's engagement had been officially terminated. Caroline was not aware of the full details of the annulment, but she knew that the Duke had been quite upset with the whole business. To avoid any unnecessary gossip, Peter was sent to London under the guise of conducting family business. Caroline officially apologized to the Duke for deceiving his family, and Caroline was pleased that her life was settling down. In truth, she suspected that her father had made more of Peter's actions than was necessary because he knew her heart was not in the match. Unlike her mother, her father often displayed a tender heart toward her. Of course, Lady Beatrice was still upset that Caroline would not be marrying into the Duke's family, but she had finally admitted that Peter was perhaps not the man she thought him to be. Caroline picked up her book and tried to read, when their eldest maid walked into the room, her usual staid expression slightly animated. "Reginald Thorson, Viscount of Bettridge, has come to call," she announced. Caroline's heart soared. She had been praying and hoping for this moment, though not truly expecting it. But now her chest tightened with anticipation. "Dearest Lord, please let her not be mistaken. Please let Reginald be there for her." "Show him in, Bertha," Caroline said. "Inform the cook for tea and biscuits, and will you kindly return and stay as my chaperone?" A moment later, Reginald walked in, a broad although hesitant smile on his face. Caroline could tell he was unsure of his welcome. "Good morning, Lady Caroline." Good morning, Mr. Thorson, Caroline answered, her heart hammering. I have heard reports that your situation has changed, he said. Yes, my situation has changed, Caroline confirmed. My father had a visitor. I am aware, Reginald said. Why did you talk to him? Caroline asked, giving up the pretense. I saw how unhappy you were, Reginald explained. I had thought I was doing the right and honorable thing by walking away from you. I assumed that ultimately you would be much happier if you married into the Duke's family, rather than marrying below your station. I thought you would suffer if you married me, and the last thing I want is for you to suffer. There is no way in which I would consider a life with you as suffering, Caroline said gently. I know that now. And then when you tried to arrange for us to be caught without a chaperone, I was angry. And in my anger, I did not consider you. I did not see that behind the ill-advised plan was the depth of what you feel for me. I focused only on the outward action, not on the motivation behind the action. Caroline watched his expression, and she saw the affection in his gaze. I convinced myself that you would be much happier without me. I believed that if I removed myself from your notice, you would see that you would have a better life with the Duke's son. But when I saw you in the village, and I saw how terribly unhappy you were, I knew that I had made a terrible mistake. I vowed at that moment that I would try and make things right. Caroline pressed her hands to her chest. So, I spoke with your father, and I gained his blessing to court you. And there is something else, he said tenderly, stepping closer. I ignored my feelings for you. I did not realize their depth, nor how miserable I would be without you. Oh, Reginald, she said breathlessly. I am more than fond of you, my lady, he said softly. And I am more than fond of you, she answered in turn. In truth, I am in love with you, he whispered. And I with you, she whispered back. As the maid discreetly turned away, Reginald pointed to the mistletoe that still hung above the doorway. Shall we? He asked, with a mischievous smile on his face. We shall, Caroline answered, her heart beating wildly as she inched toward the doorway, fully aware that all of her dreams would come true after all. The end. Thank you for listening to this heartwarming story by Grace Austen. You can be assured that all her books are clean and wholesome. To find other romances by Grace Austen, as well as the other authors at Tika House Publishing, visit www.tikahousepublishing.com. Remember to hit like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next Grace Austen romance.